welcome to part 2 of regional differences in video game soundtracks. Sometimes it's a well-known reason why it was changed, and other times it's completely unknown. So let's take a look and a listen to some soundtracks that were changed in different regions around the world. Our first one that we'll look at today was submitted by the Raptorous. It comes from Biometal on the Super Nintendo. If you want a decent soundtrack from the Super Nintendo that you may not have heard before, check out the Japanese Biometal. It's different than the American and European releases of the game. The American soundtrack was changed to include chiptune renditions of songs by 2 Unlimited, a European music group that debuted in the early 90s. It does raise one question: did 2 Unlimited's record label pay to have their music inserted as promotions? Or did the game's developer pay 2 Unlimited for the rights of the music to try and make their game stand out? Let me know what you think in the comments. In my opinion, I think the developers of the game paid the record label for the rights to the songs. It's not only advertised right on the box of the game, but also the 2 main characters were renamed to Ray and Anita, a direct reference to the 2 original members of 2 Unlimited, Ray and Anita. I think I prefer the Japanese soundtrack because the songs by 2 Unlimited breaks my immersion. I'm pulled out of the game and I think of 2 Unlimited. Nothing against them, I just like the immersion of the Japanese soundtrack. Our next up is another one on the Super Nintendo, from the game Ranma 1/2, Chounai Geki Touhen, or as it's known in the States, Street Combat. The soundtrack isn't the only change. When released in the States, the publisher changed all of the characters to be more Western. So what we got was a bunch of generic characters. I would have liked if they left the original Ranma characters in the game. There was more personality, and the artwork was done by the legendary Rumiko Takahashi. If you think Ranma's characters look oddly familiar, Inuyasha says hello. The soundtrack was the other big change. It was also made more Western. Overall, I feel the same about the music as I do the characters. The new isn't necessarily terrible, but it's a little bit generic, while the original has much more personality. Maybe it's just me, but if you play this game, I 100% recommend Ranma over Street Combat. The characters, as well as the music, are both better. The next entry on our list today is from the Sega Saturn. known as Shinobi Legion in the States and Shinobi X in Europe. The American and Japanese soundtracks are actually the same this time. It's the European version which has the different soundtrack. And it's all because of one man who delayed the release just so they could change the soundtrack which he disliked. The composer aimed for a Revenge of Shinobi style soundtrack a la Yuzo Koshiro. It's not clear who made the decision, but I support it. I really like the PAL soundtrack. The cutscenes were left as is, I'm pretty sure, because the audio was hard-coded into the FMV cutscenes. An FMV is just a pre-rendered MPEG. So this would mean getting the original source files of each cutscene, replacing the audio, and then rendering all of them again. I don't really have a preference here, both of the soundtracks have some good themes. The Sega Saturn uses a CD format, so the composers weren't limited by the hardware, and it really shows on both versions. There's definitely some CD quality going on there. Now we have Cool Borders 2. The original soundtrack from the Japanese and North American releases were changed when released in Europe. First released in Japan and North America in 1997, and not released in Europe until the next year, perhaps because of the same reason as our previous entry. It could have been delayed just to change the music. The game was already translated to English, so that's not why. The European soundtrack, composed by Jason Page, has a more drum and bass feel, while the original has more of a punk rock vibe. My experience growing up comes from the American release, which was composed by Atsunori Nanba. Most of his work comes from snowboarding video games. In this instance, when I play the game, I prefer what I grew up with. However, that doesn't mean the new soundtrack is bad. Quite the opposite, actually. I like the overall experience, plus some of those bass lines are definitely memorable. We do have one quick honorable mention today. It comes from Bionic Commando on the Game Boy. The prologue theme in the Japanese release goes unused in all other regions. Our last up today is Rolling Thunder, the original Japanese soundtrack and the changed North American soundtrack. The Japanese version of this game uses the Namco 163 sound chip. It has 8 channels of audio, 3 more than you can find on the console's built-in sound chip, the Rico 2A03. To sum it up, when you turn 8 channels into 5 channels, some instruments may be missing altogether, while other instruments will be completely different due to the different sound chip. A total of 9 games used the Namco 163 sound chip, and of course, they are all by Namco. They never leased or sold the rights. Out of those 9 games, only 2 games use all 8 channels. So there you have 6 more games that have regional differences in the soundtracks. We do have some plans for more episodes. That also includes some spotlight episodes where the entry deserves its own video. Last but never least, shout out to gold level patrons Bearsona and Quantum X. I am ICC. Thanks for watching. Peace.